Hello everyone, how you doing? Today I am going to be talking about permaculture, giving an introduction to permaculture. Thank you for joining me as I talk today about permaculture, which is a way of growing a garden kind of like the one you're seeing here in the background. So permaculture, by the way, let me know, Carrie, if you can hear me okay. I was having a problem with my sound. It'd be good to know if it's better now. Can you hear me okay? So, by the way, we always say, and thank you for the likes, of course, thank you for all of that. But we always say permaculture is growing a garden for the future. When you start a permaculture garden this year, you're growing a garden for the future. It's a different kind of garden because, all right, announcer voice is on point tonight. Hey, thank you. So when we grow a permaculture garden, when you invest in a permaculture garden this year, you're growing a kind of garden that will last into the future. We say a permaculture garden is a gift you give your future self. We say permaculture is where your environment becomes your retirement. It's investing in a healthy ecosystem, knowing that that investment will pay us back for years and years to come. Hey, Morgan, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I always appreciate all the gifts, all the likes, comments, interaction helps other people find us here. Where we talk about permaculture tonight, I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview about permaculture. We're going to be talking about what permaculture is. Again, a gift we give our future selves, a way to grow the future. When I grow, if this year you plan to grow a garden and you grow a regular annual garden, that's great, especially in this weird world that we have right now. I think that it's going to be very important for as many of us as possible to get together the resources and how much would I spend on a half-acre food forest? That's a great question. And I know you might have an answer for us, since I know you've done that. And I would love to hear how much you think is a good estimate for it. You know, and this gets to be a really interesting question. How much does a permaculture garden cost? And this is another thing that makes a permaculture garden a little bit different than any other form of garden, is that a permaculture garden can really radically fit into your budget and how much money you have and what you want to get out of it. You know, some of the easiest ways, $400,000, that, yeah, $1,500 is a really good estimate. You know, the thing gets to be there is if you are having professionals tend something like that over a long period of time. You know, it's possible that you could look at total costs. $400,000 for half an acre is really, in any terms, really exorbitant. But really kind of the whole point of a permaculture garden is that it costs whatever you have to invest into it. And in fact, we'll talk about some ways today that, are just really great ways to even get started if you have no money at all. And this is one of the great things about permaculture. When you start doing permaculture, you join a movement of people that is global and that is dispersed all over the place. And there are probably people near you in your county who are doing permaculture and have started these kinds of long-term future gardens in your region. And a lot of times, all of us who are doing this, like I sell plants, you can check out my plant packages. I got plants up for sale and seeds up for sale. It's a big part of my income. But I give away a lot of plants too. When people come over to my place for tours or come to visit, people even stop by to buy plants here. They usually leave with extra free plants. In fact, if you get one of my plant packages online, I'm proud that I usually send a whole heck ton of extra plants with it. So even when I'm selling plants, I'm giving away plants for free. And this is, hey, I appreciate that seed order. I'm getting those ready now. Some more of them are going out. A lot of them will be going out in January, February, March, and then the plant packages will start too, and all of the plants for spring planting. So the thing is that and a lot of us are doing this just because we want to help people do it. We know that it's important, like I was saying, especially right now with the crazy world we live in. The more people are growing these kinds of future gardens that are easy and highly productive, produce lots of security crops, is just a great way. Is just a great way to take care of your community. The more of us have food and have these plants available, the better. So a lot of people within the permaculture movement give away a lot of plants. So if you get involved and you've got some land, you don't know what to do, find a local permaculture meetup, find your local permaculture people and groups, go get involved. A lot of times you'll get free seeds, free plants. Unfortunately, the powers that be care more about fancy infrastructure than the food security. Yes, that is often true, unfortunately. And that's one of the problems with a lot of like civic type of programs. A lot of us find is that they're really looking to give taxpayer money to local businesses that do lots of infrastructure, and it's just a way of giving. It's kind of a make work economy thing, and it makes money for those local businesses. And they don't consider us as permaculture people to be real businesses. In central Indiana, I don't know where to start, have a nice yard, but need to work and you have a septic field. Yeah, usually septic fields are great for a sustainable garden. A lot of times people talk about indoor plumbing, or they talk about plumbing and plumbed toilets, water closets, the water closet, as a bad thing because we're flushing nutrients into water. But if you have a septic system, it goes out into the system, a lot of that nitrogen, a lot of that waste, there's no waste. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. TG. I appreciate the gifts there. I appreciate all those likes. I appreciate all these comments and interaction. It helps people find us and find out about permaculture and how we can grow a better future together. Hey, again, I appreciate that, Morgan. You guys are awesome. So tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about this, giving an overview of permaculture. We've been talking about how to get started a little bit, getting in touch with permaculture people in your area, lots of free plants out there, lots of good things. Let's see, what else do I have on here I want to show you? So, what is permaculture, by the way? With permaculture, do you plant cover crops? You can plant cover crops. And here's the thing with permaculture. So what is permaculture? Permaculture is not any specific method for gardening. Permaculture is essentially, well, let's kind of move on with this. And this is what we'll get to. We could call permaculture a pattern language for understanding how to use a landscape or build a garden or anything. Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad you found me on the live. So this is we're gonna go super geeky. Usually I don't talk about this stuff in an introduction class. We're going to go super nerd on you because you guys are all really smart. I know this is an operation here for smart, conscientious people. So if you're watching me, I know that's what you're into. You like good quality information and you care about the earth and you care about people. So I'm going to give you, we're going to go into it. We're going to give the good quality information. So permaculture is not any one method of gardening. We could call permaculture a pattern language for your landscape and your life. So, and what that means is the pattern language concept came from an architect, Christopher Alexander. You guys know what this is? Do you know what a pattern language is? I know some of you have taken my permaculture design course in the past, so I know you guys know what a pattern language is. But it actually came from computer programming. And Christopher Alexander was tasked with the idea of trying to improve architecture as a whole, and especially DIY architecture and architecture for things we were just talking about, how local municipalities might make not the best decisions sometimes with things like architecture and their expenses. And so Christopher Alexander wanted to be able to help people, just anybody, and DIYers, people do better architecture. And communities make better architecture. And he looked to the tool of computer programming. Because if in computer programming, there are all of these little mini patterns that people have put together. So if I want to write a program to say, to teach people about permaculture, then I can go out and I can find all these little tools and select the right tools and the right bits of code and the right freeware, and I can put together an app from all of these different pieces. Maybe I have a basic app to start with, and I can put all of those together and I can make something really good, really fast and easily. And that is exactly the idea of a pattern language, is to share information and share ideas just like computer programming in that way. So permaculture exists as a way of sharing a bunch of great different sorts of ideas. And just to give you a couple, right off the top of, right as we get started here, we can talk about water collection systems. And this is one that we'll talk about that can turn a desert into a lush food forest. And we can do the same exact thing on an urban yard or a suburban yard, collecting water, routing it from the house into these swale systems in a garden, into keyhole gardens, and suddenly we can turn a really depleted, dry landscape into a lush, food-producing, beautiful landscape. And, another pattern could be this keyhole garden thing. Other patterns could be fortress plants that protect the garden from pests or protect the garden from weeds, and in some cases pests. Mulch maker plants, where they can actually grow a lot of mulch for us. Nitrogen fixing plants. This whole idea is called a guild. So these are different kinds of patterns that we can put together, and we can choose which patterns are going to make the landscape that we like and the goals that we want to meet. So there can be some cases where cover crops, by the way, this is all my answer to the question about cover crops. Does permaculture use cover crops? Permaculture will use almost any tool at the right time. So any kind of pattern, any kind of tool, there's a place for it, right? It's just finding the right place for it. Cover crops in permaculture, I will say some permaculturists are really experimenting with cover crops. But a lot of times when they do, they will actually call me or ask me and say, Mike, how do I terminate the cover crop? What do I do here? Can you do this with free-ranging chickens? Absolutely. In fact, another pattern that is even in some of my books that's a very common pattern in permaculture is a chicken forage forest or chicken meadow type system. So we can actually grow a food forest. By the way, a food forest garden looks like, or a forest garden looks like this. It's a garden in layers. A food forest garden is another pattern that we can look at and learn about. By the way, this is a research, I have to tell you this thing. This is super cool. This is a research-based thing. When after Christopher Alexander created the pattern language concept, scientists started looking at it and they found, well, this could be useful for a lot of things other than architecture. So he actually ended up looking at different ways to, so yeah, absolutely. We can make a food forest garden that is optimized specifically to helping to feed chickens, or we can create whole systems based on ducks. You mentioned ducks, and there are whole tracts and different patterns within permaculture for integrating ducks into a garden too. So then, as we look into it, we can start looking at these patterns, we can learn about them, and we can start to look at a whole landscape as a template with the different patterns within the garden. And so this is the really cool thing about this pattern language concept. This is the best research-based way we now know of to communicate a lot of information to DIYers to increase their proficiency with doing something that they're not professionals at. So if you don't want to go and get a PhD in sustainable agriculture, and by the way, there are very few places where you can get that kind of work, because a lot of the university programs are focused on very like conventional approaches based on pesticides, right? And buying chemicals and doing tilling. So permaculture is a pattern language for sustainable human settlements to create beautiful, abundant places to live without using those pesticides and poisons. And the whole idea of it is, how can we give you the patterns, the basic ideas as much as possible, as many different patterns as possible, so that you can start to make better decisions about these things. And there's good research that shows across a bunch of different fields, pattern languages are really very effective for helping DIYers make better decisions. By the way, whatever you are passionate about, if you want to communicate it to, permaculture is systems thinking, absolutely. And this is one of these things. If we're thinking in systems, we're thinking of how we can get to as many people as possible. And a pattern language is one of the best tools for doing it. So whatever you are passionate about, if you are passionate about social justice, if you're passionate about, well, computers, it's already used, right? That's where the idea came from. If you're passionate about fashion, if you're passionate about hairstyles, anything like this, you can, and you want to help people do better at it, who are DIYers, who don't want to go and get a degree and be professionals at it, but want to be very proficient, then a pattern language is a really good tool. So there are all these studies, for example, where they will even just expose amateurs for a very brief amount of time to a pattern language type of a book or a resource where they can browse through patterns. They can see the different kinds of tools available. So instead of just thinking about a conventional garden, all of a sudden we've been already talking about water collection systems and food forest gardens and gardens in layers, and we can see shade-loving gardens, and we can talk about chicken forage forests, and we can talk about edible meadows. And all of a sudden you're starting to get all of these different ideas that expand your mind beyond just thinking of the conventional annual garden, right? And it's the same way with anything. If they've even done studies with like planes and jets, and they take people who are amateurs and they give them a pattern language about what makes a better jet, and all of a sudden they can produce something that would be much better than what an amateur would be able to do without that, or even if they are just given a textbook about how to make a jet engine. So Are the principles the pattern, or the principles guidelines to the pattern? The principles, the principles are not the patterns. The principles are another kind of thought tool. So this is, thank you. By the way, I love this sort of interactive way of doing things because we can learn a lot about an introduction to permaculture by having a conversation. So I appreciate all those questions. So we could say then, what is permaculture? Permaculture was designed, considered to be in one part a pattern design or pattern creation kind of design system. And again, it's the best research-based tool we have to help people make more sustainable landscapes and better, more productive, easier gardens. And so the big part of it is the pattern language concept. So every permaculture book, by the way, I've got a couple of them. If you're interested in that, you see my name there. You can look me up on the place where, any place where you're buying the books, and you'll find me. You'll find my books. And all of them could be considered pattern language books. So they're books filled with patterns like food forest gardens and edible meadows and water collection systems and keyhole gardens and all that. Hey, thank you for joining the fan club. That's awesome. I will figure out, now that I got a fan, in fact, I've been thinking about doing something with that this spring, really increasing my content to help as many people create new gardens this spring as possible. So I'm going to be doing something with that and make sure that I'm giving you guys good stuff for that. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna do something with that. It's gonna be awesome. I don't know exactly what yet, but we're gonna do some special videos and stuff. So, I want to make sure that I actually slow down for a second, answer a few of those questions. So going back to cover crops. With cover crops, it really depends. There's no one permaculture garden that will include every sort of pattern. But there are times when I do use cover crops. If I'm going to have bare soil for a long time, I will use a cover crop. All of my books actually contain cover crop ideas and multiple types of cover crops. Once a garden is established for me, I tend to have gardens that look like this. And most of the time, if they're annual garden areas, then with intensive vegetable gardens, then, and by the way, I grow all sorts of food in these gardens, in gardens that look like this. So these are all some of my yields just from 1 year. And so since it's like an ecosystem, and my goal is to make gardens that are like ecosystems, thank you. Yeah, that scarlet bee balm is a very beautiful plant. Then I usually don't have bare soil anytime, and if I do, I want to cover it up with lots of deep mulch. So because of that, once my garden really hits and is established, I don't use cover crops anymore because there's never any bare soil, right? It's an ecosystem that grows food with minimal disturbance, even in my annual gardens. And all of my annual gardens are based like this, with perennial gardens, with perennial companion plants integrated into them, and then a lot of these I will chop and drop to make deep mulch, and then I plant my annuals into that deep mulch bed. And so because of that, there's never a place for cover crops within it. And the research actually shows that deep mulch is actually more effective at all of the goals of cover crops than cover crops are. So if you're going to have bare soil and you're going to dig the garden, cover crops are really great, and they're a very useful tool for permaculture in that case. But in other times, then we don't use it. How do you feed your soil without fertilizer or cover crops? Well, for one thing, I do use lots of nitrogen fixers within my garden. So the nitrogen fixers help, and I use lots of slash mulch systems, and I really could do I really will do one of these entirely about soil fertility. So there are a bunch of different ways to feed the soil and have a garden that produces abundant fertility over time without using compost and without using cover crops. Well, but it's kind of a misnomer, isn't it? Because if the garden looks like this, and if the garden is essentially managed with a bunch of perennials and perennial ground covers and all of that, the garden is the cover crop, right? There's never a time where there's bare soil. So all of this biodiversity, there's a lot of nitrogen fixers integrated into the garden at all times. There's lots of nitrogen fixers in the hedgerow and the food forest that surrounds this garden, which I would call this whole thing a food forest. And there are lots of nitrogen fixing trees in it. There's lots of nitrogen fixing plants within it. Even areas with grass and lawn, you can see the clover, a nitrogen fixing plant that's integrated in everywhere. So nitrogen fixers are one thing. Another thing is forest. So the whole food forest concept is a fertility generating system. One of the big patterns that we teach in permaculture is the hierarchies of fertility creation. Ecosystems actually generate fertility on their own through a bunch of different means. One of them is tight nutrient cycling because of all the biodiversity. There's some really cool studies from something called the Jenna Project that were then replicated in Michigan, and now they've been replicated around the world, where they actually took plots of land, and a bunch of them, and then they just use polycultures. See, this is a polyculture. Instead of a monoculture, there's a bunch of different plants in here. And when they got to about, I think the number was like 17. When they got to about 17 species of plant to one of their garden beds or plots, then the plot started to like spontaneously generate fertility in some interesting ways. Jenna is Jenna. Jenna. Yep, they're Jenna. It's in Germany, and they publish all of their data. You can go to their website, and if you know what to look for, you can sort through and search through all of their data. So it's really cool. And now here's the coolest part about this. I've got all these graphics in my soil presentation. So at some point I'll do the soil presentation and show you all this stuff. So this is wild. This is wild. So they did plots where they used fertilizer. They did plots where they used compost. And they used plots where they used nitrogen fixing plants. And then they used plots with no compost, no nitrogen fixing plants, and no fertilizer, just high biodiversity. Over a long period of time, the plot that developed and grew the most fertility and the most productivity over time with no added fertilizer were just the plots that had super high biodiversity. In fact, what's crazy is that the plots that didn't even use nitrogen fixers maintained a higher nitrogen balance than the plots with nitrogen fixers, so long as they had enough biodiversity. So we just talked about that. Nitrogen, but still nitrogen fixers are good, right? We know that they're pulling nitrogen from the atmosphere and putting it into the soil to help fertilize the garden. All of this biodiversity, also carbon stocks. This kind of biodiversity built carbon in the soil faster than anything else. Another thing that builds soil carbon and soil fertility really fast is mulch. There are studies that compare cover crops to mulch, and the mulch beats the cover crops every time. The mulch beats compost. You can take a garden and not put any compost in, and you can, A/B test compost versus just mulch. the mulch will win every time, building soil fertility and building soil structure, building soil carbon. So so this is the great idea about how a pattern language and permaculture patterns work, and learning about a bunch of different patterns. I have the idea, a goal. Permaculture always starts with our goals. And I have a goal, for example, to make my garden maintain high productivity and all of this lushness over time with no added fertilizer. And this picture of this garden is about 10 years old, and almost very, very, very little fertilizer, or no fertilizer, no chemical fertilizer was ever used, and very little compost was ever brought into the system. And most of the beds never even had any compost added to them. They just grew their own mulch, used lots of deep mulch all the time, had lots of biodiversity, and over time, this chop and drop mulch, they're the same. Chop and drop basically is a way of growing mulch. So in this garden, in the background here, there's a hedgerow you can't see off to the side, and there are a lot of compost and mulch maker crops. I cut those crops, put them right on the garden, keep that garden bed mulch. There are nitrogen fixers along there too to help replace any nitrogen that's lost to the system. And so I can start to double up all these patterns. If my goal is to produce a garden that will grow in abundance and fertility over time, then I want to stack as many patterns for fertility as I can. So some of those patterns could be, again, a mulch maker hedgerow, a mulch maker crop, mulch makers integrated into the garden. So I'm using deep mulch gardening. There's one of my layers in my fertility system. A second layer in the fertility system is forest, because forests are the second best way that we know of to generate high fertility. A forest will generate more fertility than it uses, which is why forest soils end up becoming richer and better over time. Comfrey is great as a mulch maker plant. The hedgerow that you can't see in the background here has lots of comfrey in it. And let's see, usually in most of my garden pictures, you can find some comfrey somewhere. In this one, I can't quite see any comfrey in this part of the garden because it's usually off to the sides, and this is more productive stuff. So straw mulch is great. That's right, if you import straw mulch, be aware that it could be sprayed with pesticides, which is why this garden grows 100% of its own mulch. Again, another part, so far we've got deep mulch, growing mulch makers to do it, mulch hedgerows, fertility hedgerows, gardening in a forest clearing. So this little annual garden is surrounded by a food forest. It's a food forest all around. That food forest generates fertility that helps to feed the garden. Another thing is high biodiversity. We were just talking about the Jenna Project, and all of this high biodiversity again helps create fertility on its own. There are nitrogen fixers throughout. There's another level right there. And of course, by the way, if you want to do the nutrient math, Cornell actually has done this for us. And 4 inches of organic, 4 to 6 inches of almost all organic compost added annually every year will eventually provide all of the nutrients for a high productivity garden. So if you do more than that, that's fine, because we're actually then building nutrients in a way that cycles them very easily. And so you won't, like if you just use too much compost, you can use too much compost, the nitrogen will be lost and actually create a pollution problem, and you're just wasting nitrogen. But if you add it as mulch, the mulch will get cycled into microbes, and the microbes die or get eaten, and we call that microbial necromass. And the microbial necromass is what really builds soil structure, and it has like mineral fertility built into it, or the fertility is captured in the microbial necromass and insect necromass. And so the plants can kind of break that down and access it as they need it, and you end up with really fertile soil that is stable and that isn't leaching a bunch of pollutants. Very inspiring. I've been adding perennials year after year. It's a great way to do it. Yeah, you can find it on my website. I can't talk about that on here though. They'll give me a warning and they give me a spanking if I talk about any of my wares. But after this, you can look, you can click on my thing and you can find it. I have just a few packages left. I'm going to be closing those really soon. But I have just a few left. So get in there and you can get that. So they're great packages. A lot of these cool plants that you see in this picture, this blue thing behind my carrot flowers here, which, I allow carrots to self-sow in the garden. And so when you see these are actually going to self-sow and produce a lot of great carrots. I see squash. Obviously, there's this japonica corn. This comes in all my packages. There's sea kale back here. That's going out. In the back here, there are Jerusalem artichokes. There's perennial. You even see some Jerusalem artichoke flowers back here. Another great one. Right there, you can see it just a little bit right there. Crohn's will go out in most of those packages. It depends on where you live. I customize the packages for where you live. Some places, some of these plants are considered listed. Am I trellising it all? Yeah, absolutely. Over on this side of the garden, you can't quite see it, but there's a fence made of apple trees, and those have trellis on them. In the backyard, there's actually like a trellis in this garden. So my other gardens, I usually trellis everywhere. Again, we're looking for this kind of idea of a garden in layers. And so using vines and having them throughout the garden in different places are another great pattern that we can use. So anyway, does that give you an idea about how in permaculture we can structure fertility for a garden? It's looking at all these different patterns that can add fertility, and we stack them up. And when we do that and use that redundancy of having a bunch of different ways to do it, we can end up with a garden that really does grow in fertility over year without having to do that added work of bringing in compost or bringing in any kind of fertility. The garden grows its own fertility. So thank you so much for asking those questions. Somebody else asked about the patterns. Are the patterns the principles? And the idea there is, no, we can look at it as like Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. Kind of like I was talking about Christopher Alexander. Christopher Alexander wanted to find a way to improve architecture for DIYers. David Holmgren and Bill Mollison had exactly the same goal for sustainable gardening and farming. And so the book A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander came out right around that same time. They saw it, they said, this is exactly what we were thinking of. In fact, the first permaculture book, the first two permaculture books, Permaculture 1 and Permaculture 2, are written as textbooks. They are written as a how-to make a sustainable garden. Then they saw the book, A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander, and they were like, this is it. This is obviously the right tool. Now, back then, they didn't have the science yet showing that it's such a great tool, which we have now. Like I said, there's all the science showing that even a brief exposure to a pattern language will improve your outcomes. By the way, think about that. Right now, in the way someone who's done a permaculture design certificate course tends to start communicating in these patterns. So when you see a permaculture video, when you watch my videos, I might show you one little pattern, like how to do a food forest, how to do an edible meadow, what are some good perennial plants. All of these patterns, even a brief exposure, the science says even a brief exposure to a pattern language resource will improve your outcomes with whatever the topic is. So when you watch my videos, it's a research-based, watching my videos is a research-based way to improve your landscape and your garden. And so, like even just now, we've been talking about patterns for fertility, patterns for water, patterns for growing like food forests, different plants that we can use, a technique like trellising. And you're starting to think outside of the normal way of gardening. And that's the whole point of permaculture. So permaculturists will tend to communicate in patterns in this sort of way because we know that it's just the best way to communicate. But Bill Mollison and David Holmgren didn't stop there. And by that point, there was already a small permaculture community. And they were teaching permaculture. And they were trying to figure out what is the best way to communicate this. And so they also came up with multiple sets of ethics. So permaculture and permaculturists will usually, almost always, talk about ethics too. And this is a way of centering ourselves, and it's a way of communicating our values and our goals to people. So the Holmgren ethics, his way of formulating was just to say, earth care, people care, fair share. So permaculturists then, we can tell people we care about earth care, people care, fair share. When you learn about permaculture, everything that we're trying to learn about and teach about, how to garden, how to make a society, how to make a home in a way that cares for people, cares for the earth, and cares for how we cycle and use resources within whatever the system is. So earth care, people care, fair share. Using your native bush willow species, if you have one, is a great way to trellis. Absolutely. I agree with that. There's another great pattern. Look at that. You tune in to my live here and you learn permaculture patterns. It's a and then you can start looking into them more. They start changing the way you think, the way you see landscapes. And then we can look at whole gardens and see these different things. We can see, well, this tree actually is being used as a trellis too, for a nitrogen fixing plant, by the way. Groundnut, Apios americana, is a native, North American native, really delicious tuber groundnut that I like to mash them. They're kind of like black beans when I mash them. And they have, this is actually a perennial kale too. So I still grow this perennial kale species. In fact, I still have living cuttings of this exact plant now in about 5 different gardens that I work on. And they're probably close to like 16, 17 years old. So I still have cuttings of this same plant that's like 16 or 17 years old. Here's another pattern for you. This is a natural cutting of red boar kale. Red boar. And there's a really cool thing about red boar kale, which is that in the research literature, about 1 in 10 of these plants will have a high aptitude for perennializing, which means that they really are very cold tolerant and are easy to keep from flowering. And so long as you can keep it from flowering, it will come back year after year after year. And I've definitely had single individual red boar plants that have lived 5 years. So it's a really cool plant to perennialize. And then another pattern in here is this oregano hedge. You can kind of see in the background here, it looks like a little box hedge. You can see this in a lot of my pictures. It's something I use a lot. Oregano is a great fortress plant. It repels a lot of grasses and weeds, helps keep it out of there. Perennial kale confuses you. There's tree kale, sea kale. Yeah, this one is just red boar kale is just a regular kale. Sea kale was in one of my other pictures. It's not kale. Sea kale is actually a totally different species. Tree kale or tree collards are actually a Brassica oleracea. So they are actually a kale that just grows really tall and perennializes and can again live 3 to 5 years. So it's a really cool plant. And there are some others like cosmic kale and Dalbinton kale, which are kales that perennialize very well and are very productive as perennials. So again, here we are talking about different little patterns that hopefully you can take and put into your garden. So permaculture is a pattern language or sets of pattern languages, and then ethics to help us ground ourselves and center ourselves and think about what our goals are. And then next, permaculture, do I deadhead the kale? Are we talking about kale? With the kale, I harvest the florets when they form. You have to keep, for it to really perennialize. So kales are naturally biennial, and some kales, most kales, most kales are going to try really, really, really hard to flower in the first or second year, usually in the second year. So in the first year they'll grow. In the second year, they're going to barely produce any leaves and put all of their energy into flowering. And if you cut the flower stalk, they're going to keep producing flowers until the plant dies. And then it's dead. So the second year, the kale doesn't really produce a lot other than those little flowers. So a kale that has a high aptitude for perennializing will maybe not even try to flower in the second year. Or if it does, it'll try just once, and you cut and eat those flowers, and then it says, well, guess I'm not going to flower this year. I might as well grow again. And it just grows like normal. Make sense? Hey, where are we talking about? We're talking about permaculture, an introduction to permaculture. So since we're giving an introduction, just talking about how permaculture is a pattern language for having a better garden. So we're talking about some general patterns that will help you make a better garden. So, but Bill Mollison and David Holmgren didn't stop there. They also created multiple sets of principles. Now, there are actually two sets of permaculture principles. The Holmgren principles and the Mollison principles. And actually now there are way more. I use my own set. So there are the Mike Hogue principles too, which is just one principle, by the way. Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is how you need to think. Like a lot of times, if we when we do pruning of trees, it's the same thing. Try to have this moment of empathy with the tree. Try to experience, if you're the tree wants as much sun on as much of it as possible, on as many of its leaves as possible. And any leaves that are in shade are going to cost the tree energy. So when I prune, I literally try to imagine being that tree and try to imagine how the air flows through it. I want to maximize the airflow through the tree. I want to maximize how much sun every leaf on the tree is getting, and I want to minimize areas of the tree that are getting no sun throughout the day. And so a lot of this sort of gardening is like looking at what's the one principle? Yeah, so in one of my permaculture design courses about 15 years ago, we talked about how permaculture principles keep expanding, and now there's like 50. Yeah, in fact, there are a few people who do decks of cards, and they're very good. They're very fun to use. And there's like 50 or 60 permaculture principles, and a lot of them are redundant, if I'm honest. In fact, so before I continue on with this, I could say there are the Mollison principles, the original permaculture principles that were in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. These are very academic, and they're very specifically kind of like a pattern. He was looking at what scientists teach about ecological principles for creating a garden or creating a sustainable landscape. And he took some of the best scientific principles as formulated by scientists, and a lot of those too, he recognized also exist in indigenous cultures. So, but he wanted it to be academically grounded. So he would often talk about, here's what scientists say, and then here's how this is said in some indigenous culture, right? So he always wanted to give credit to indigenous cultures, but also have it based in science, so it was taken seriously by scientists. So his set of principles are very much design principles focused on creating creating a great system. One of those, to give you a couple of those Mollison principles, some of them are use redundancy in the landscape. So earlier I was talking about stacking functions is another way of putting that. So you know how I was talking about if I want to create a garden that generates its own fertility, I stack as many patterns for fertility as I can. Deep mulch, biodiversity, forest, nitrogen fixers, all of those things together. And so that's a Molsonian principle. Another one is another one is to work with ecological succession. So when I talk about forest, having areas of annuals, having perennials, having trees, that would be another thing. So the Molson principles are very much focused on design. Then David Holmgren, his student, wanted to make something that was more accessible and more about communicating permaculture values and teaching the general public. And so the Holmgren principles are things like use and value diversity, create no waste, observe, then interact. Those are Holmgren principles. And they're more about communicating very, very simply important values. Now, David Holmgren would say, has said, that all of the Mollison principles that are more academic sounding are represented in his principle in some form, but his principles are more accessible to a general audience. Make sense? So a lot of times I would say that learning the Holmgren principles first, in fact, by the way, here's a trick for you. If you want to get both sets, you can go to a browser. When you're done watching me, don't do it now. You'll get me in trouble. Don't get me in trouble if you leave this. If you leave this and go off of here, I'll get in trouble, especially you all go to the same place. So, but you can go to permacultureprinciples.org and permacultureprinciples.com, and you'll get both the Holmgren principles and the Mollison principles. You can see both side by side. Or you can go to my website, Transformative Adventures, and you can see my versions of both of those and the single principle that they break down to. So anyway, the permaculture principles, after the original Mollison and Holmgren ones, kept spiraling out of control. People kept adding new ones and new ones and new ones. And a lot of people felt they were redundant. And so I gave my permaculture students, for one of my permaculture design courses, the assignment to try to reduce them and find as many ways we could build up, integrate, or how many ways those principles could be reduced so that there was no more redundancy to them. And after the end of that semester, we boiled them down to basically one single principle. So I'll let you guess what it is. I'll tell you later. If you know the permaculture principles, we can talk about that. So anyway, I actually feel like this has been a great introduction to the idea of permaculture. We've seen the basic ideas here. We've seen our goal is to create easy, abundant landscapes that will grow healthier, more fertile, and more abundant over time with less work. So that if I plant an annual garden, here's the biggest idea. And by the way, here's one word of our single principle: invest. Permaculturists invest our time and energy and money into creating systems for the future. That's not exactly the whole thing. Just reading the comments here for a second. I appreciate all your comments and all the discussion. It's so great. I love sharing this stuff with people. You could tell after 25 years or something. 25 years. This is 25 years for me since I started doing permaculture. This year, wow. I only just realized this. This is my 25th anniversary as a permaculturist. So I'm still as excited about it and excited to share it as I ever was. So, so if I make an annual garden, I till it, I order my seeds, right? I order seeds now. I till the garden, I till it, I prep the garden, I pull out all the weeds, I do all that. I plant all my seeds, I plant all my plants, I plant it. I gotta weed it, I gotta water it, I gotta take care of any pests, I gotta fertilize it, right? And at the end of the season, I harvest, yay. And then next year, I have to do it all over again, right? And the next year, I have to do all of that work all over again, forever, right? So if I want to have an annual garden, I have to do it annually. So, and if I leave for a vacation, or I leave because I get sick, or I go to my sister's wedding, who knows, and I leave for a few weeks, the whole garden could get overrun with pests and weeds, and I get nothing. And I have to start all over next year. A permaculture garden, if you invest in a permaculture garden, the idea is you create a perennial food-producing ecosystem that lives and improves and continues to put out food year after year after year into the future. This is why permaculture is the gift you give your future self. If you establish this kind of garden, it can be productive for year after year after year into the future. So that is what we're trying to do as permaculturists. And the other thing that makes this possible is the interconnection of all of the parts, right? The garden takes care of itself because the forest produces fertility, all the biodiversity, all of these plants that are beneficial insect attractor plants help control pests and diseases. The biodiversity helps control pests and diseases. The garden is designed, as I said earlier, to catch its own water, to grow its own fertility. And so every job that I need for the garden, if I need mulch for the garden, I need to grow mulch maker plants. So the garden grows its own mulch. So I have created a connection between mulch and mulch maker plants, the garden and mulch maker plants. It can be your legacy, 100%. And think about this. This world, if you go to Central Asia or even parts of the United States, I've mentioned before, I have videos about Turkey Run, about other places where there are still the remnants of Native American food forests. They haven't been tended by Native Americans for hundreds of years now, but they still are producing tons of food. They're still continuing on producing all this food. The apple walnut forest of Kyrgyzstan, the apricot and almond and walnut apple forest of the Hunza Valley in Gilgit-Baltistan. These food forests are thousands of years old, and they still produce food today because someone way back then planted the future, thought about the future, and planted a permaculture garden. And those permaculture gardens from thousands of years ago are still producing food and supporting communities today in those regions. So, hey, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the likes. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for checking out my books later. And so, I'll be kicked off, maybe. Aha, I got it. I couldn't get the puzzle right with my fingers. So that would be the one principle, is we invest. We take our time and our energy and our thoughtfulness and our care, our observation, and we invest that into building connections to nature and community, building connections between all things. Permaculturists invest in creating connections. That's what we do. So I would call that, so that's what my students came up with as the one principle that underlies everything else. And I love it because that principle is not actually stated in either the Holmgren or the Molson principles, but I think that it underlines every single one of them. Every one of those principles, if you go and look at them, could be broken down to the idea of investing in building connection between things. So yeah. So that was kind of another answer to a question that went way back. We've been having this long, beautiful, meandering discussion here about what permaculture is and introducing it. We've said it's a pattern language idea that communicates how to make better lives, landscapes, and livelihoods through communicating patterns to people. It has a set of ethics to help guide our selection of those patterns and sets of principles to help us think creatively about how to choose patterns is the basic idea there. And what else is permaculture? Permaculture is then also sets of pattern languages, all of the different books, teachers, video makers like me, and the community of people who come together to share those patterns and help each other do permaculture. So that's what we could say to this. And with it, I think it's the best tool that I've ever found to create really easy, highly productive gardens for most people. And the whole reason why it works is because we're taking our time to invest our time and energy this year into connections that will pay us back for years and years to come. And if we can do that, then as time goes on, we do less and less work and get more and more yields. Can you establish guilds through community gardens? 100%. Yes. Yeah, guilds are great tools for all kinds of gardens. And in fact, a great kind of permaculture feature for a community garden. I mentioned this garden has a linear food forest and edible hedgerow to the north side here that you can't quite see. That's filled with fertility plants, nitrogen-fixing plants, lots of great food plants, Asian pears, gummy berries, edible roses, crab apples, medlars, blackberries, raspberries, grapes, all through this hedgerow, and a lot of chop and drop mulch maker plants. So this garden grows its fertility and its mulch. It's a great kind of feature to grow in a community garden, because then the community garden has a built-in battery for biodiversity, to attract beneficial insects, lots of companion plants in there, attract beneficial wildlife. It can be designed to keep out negative wildlife, and it can grow fertility and grow mulch for the community garden. So it's a great kind of guild to use in a community garden. What do I grow for mulch? Let's see if it's on. If I've got a good, if it's on here. Do I have mulch maker plants on this one? Oh, I actually don't. This is an older version, the newer version of this illustration. This one is like 20. This illustration is like 20 years old. Of course, I've like copied it and scanned it a million times. But this was originally in watercolor and hand drawn. People say they think it looks like AI art, and it's like, this is like 20 years old. It's in my oldest books, and it goes on my website back to like 20 years. So this version doesn't have mulch maker plants, but some of my favorite mulch maker plants, some edible ones that are really great. My favorite of all is probably sunchokes, because sunchokes grow so huge, they produce a ton of biomass. The mulch is sunflower material is naturally allelopathic, so it prevents weeds from germinating. But in small amounts, it actually increases plant growth. So if you plant plants into a bed mulch with sunchoke leaves, it will keep other weeds from germinating, really reduce the weeds, and improve the plant growth at the same time. So pretty magic. I love to use as a fortress plant I love to use oregano right there. Blood vein sorrel is really great. Sorrel is great. Walking onions, comfrey. All of those work as fortress plants, and they can be chopped and dropped really well to make mulch. Some any kind of woody perennial in that kind of situation that you have to prune, those prunings can be used as mulch too. So gumi can grow really big, can produce a lot of material that you can chop and drop into a garden for a woodier mulch. The comfrey always and walking onions are always in all of my fertility hedgerows. Uh, Another one is yarrow is really great for it. It's very nitrogen rich. It's a great thing that kind of fills in. And another one I really love, cut plant. Rosin weed is really good. A nitrogenous one, another nitrogen fixing one is Siberian pea shrub, um, and blue false indigo. So those together might make a really great fertility strip as a mulch maker strip that you can chop and drop. It's got nitrogen fixers in it. It's got plants that grow tons of biomass that are really nutrient rich that I can chop and drop and use as a mulch. What is a fortress plant? A fortress plant, like this keyhole garden bed, is designed with plants around the outside, wherever it's in contact with lawn or weeds. Fortress plants are allelopathic plants, which means they secrete poison and poison other plants that we're using for our advantage. And we're specifically trying to find ones that will poison plants that we want to keep out, like grass. Oregano is proven in research to deter grass. So in this picture, for example, you see this hedge of oregano next to my mixed species perennial polyculture edible lawn mix. And that keeps the grass from invading the garden beds while I can still have a grass lawn to walk on. Now, then the oregano also really, when it's used as a chop and drop plant, so I cut it to keep it like a hedge, use the clippings as mulch, and it's proven to really dramatically increase soil fungi. So it's really great for growing in tree guilds. Hey, thank you for just following me. How close are the oregano plants? When I originally planted this, I planted them at 1 foot, but oregano runs, right? So does it work with Cuban oregano? I don't know. I don't know how allelopathic or how resistant to grass encroachment Cuban oregano is, but it does have the oreganum in it, which is the chemical that is allelopathic to grasses. Thank you, Rochelle, for the peppers. Like a little spice in my life. I appreciate you. Rochelle Frey, thank you so much for the gifts. I love it all. Thank you for all the questions. So it would definitely be worth trying. What about a black walnut tree? Black walnut is famously allelopathic. And so this is the thing. In permaculture, there's no right or wrong. Permaculture is about understanding and building connections. So if I design a guild with black walnut, the black walnut will be allelopathic and will keep certain kinds of weeds from germinating. So it'll also keep certain vegetables from thriving, right? So I have to be careful about what I grow in a black walnut guild. But if I pick the right plants, then the garden will require less weeding because there are fewer species that will germinate and thrive with black walnut. So if I pick the right guild for a black walnut tree, then it will reduce, it's good, it will reduce my overall maintenance. It's the same thing with anything. If I plant fennel, fennel could be a great fortress plant, but it's again strongly allelopathic. Sunchokes can be strongly allelopathic to grasses and to certain other things germinating. So sunchokes are a great fortress plant. Here's a tip, another pattern for you. Sunray, sunchoke. There's a sunchoke that is a dwarf sunchoke, very strongly allelopathic, multi-use. It produces really tasty red colored sunchokes, which are really great to eat, really crispy and nice. But it only grows maybe a few feet tall, and you can keep it pruned pretty small. So I can use that really easily in a vegetable garden as a fortress plant. Cut it. Skirret is another great multi-use plant. It doesn't produce a ton of biomass, and if I chop that biomass, it really makes the roots not usable. So I don't tend to use skirret as a fortress plant, but it should be a little bit allelopathic, so I could potentially use it that way. I just never have. The other great thing about skirret, though, is it's one of the best beneficial insect attractor plants that I grow in my garden. So again, it's multi-use, stacking functions, one of those permaculture principles, helps invite beneficial insects that fight off pests and fight off diseases in the garden, and grows a really great vegetable. Hey, that's another one that you can get on my website when I'm done talking here. I do have just a few packages left. They are going to ship with both with walking onions, skirret, what was I talking about earlier? Sea kale, sunchokes, all these plants, some great seeds. Check those out. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I got cool stuff, books, seeds. I'm going to be doing a full permaculture design course starting soon. That's available on my website too. Check that out. I'm going to start doing some informational videos on that. Again, permaculture is great. I'm going to have it available in different levels, so that if you just want to have your best garden ever this year, I'm going to help you do it. I'm going to try to make it available for everyone who wants to be able to do it. And if you want to take your next step in your plant wizardry career and start making a livelihood out of playing with plants, then I will have some packages to help you do that too. Do you plan to have pawpaw variety science? Yes, not the spring, but certainly next fall. And for the people who do the professional packages, 100% I will be having pawpaw science. Black walnut covers. Some plants that have evolved with black walnut, that are black walnut tolerant. Thoughts on raised beds? Yeah, like we were saying before, any pattern can be permaculture. I use raised beds pretty often with keyhole type beds. I do wicking beds very often as raised beds. I do the Permaculture Classic, the herb spiral. The herb spiral is a raised garden bed. So yeah, thoughts on raised beds. There are pros and cons to raised beds, and the whole thing with permaculture is understanding what the pros and cons are when they meet your goals. Juglone, so last thing, yeah, you can look up juglone resistant plants. There are lots of lists for them. And so that'd be a thing. Choosing native plants that have co-evolved with black walnut is usually a good choice. So for food producing plants that can thrive in the shade of black walnut and with the juglone, would be like clove currant, native, definitely like ramps, things like that, ground cherries. I'm trying to think of what else I've grown well under black walnut. A lot of leafy greens have always grown really well under black walnut. Walking onions have grown really well under black walnut. I actually have in Beauty and Abundance, I actually have some plant lists specifically about jug loan tolerant plants. I think that's my only book that has like a whole big plant list and a whole section on patterns for jug loan tolerant plants. Yeah, pawpaws. Pawpaws are great with black walnut. Of course, red bud trees. Um, those sunchokes again will do fine at the drip line. So there's actually a lot of things that we can grow that are jug loan tolerant. Chinkapin or pure red mulberry trees. Pure red mulberry trees, I I I don't know, um, because there probably isn't such a thing. Red mulberry. But I would look through catalogs and see if anybody is selling grafted pure red mulberry. They're just so rare. And red mulberry, it's very controversial as to whether red mulberry is actually, Morus rubra is actually a different species than Morus alba, because they cross with 100%, just cross with no barrier. So there's a lot of ecologists and biologists that actually think that they are kind of phenotypes of the same species technically, and that one, primarily evolved in Asia, and the other one in the U.S. They have slightly different ecotypes. One is a shade forest plant, because in North America that's where it grew, and the other one is a field type plant in Asia, Morus alba. And I've heard some scientists say, and I live, by the way, here I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We actually have a scholar of Morus rubra in town who is like specialized in the idea. I haven't read all of her work, but I know that a lot of people say that basically most Morus rubra stock includes Morus alba genetics. Chinkapin, there are several places that sell chinkapins. I'm going to be honest with you. Uh, I was really excited about growing chinkapins, and then they're just all shell, and the nuts inside are pea sized, and there's such a pain that I no longer grow them. And they are a cool native plant and a cool wildlife plant. But I found I was eating none of them. And I will say that if you've ever heard of like Paradise Lot, Eric Tonesmeyer's garden, and Jonathan Frakes, their garden, they started with chinkapin and they pulled the chinkapin too, for the same reason. So just throwing out there that you might try, chickpea is small is the advantage, but I might try a chestnut and prune it, to be honest. And so many great questions, but I've been going pretty hard on here for an hour and a half, and I need a drink of water. So, everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this little introduction to permaculture. Again, when we look at pattern languages like permaculture, the science shows that even a brief introduction to a pattern language where we look at these patterns and think about them as patterns I can learn about and pick and choose from and put them together and build connections with, that it increases our outcomes, even as beginners. So I hope that when you watch my videos and you watch my lives, you're becoming a better gardener. And look out for, probably we're going to be starting, it was supposed to start in January, but it's been a weird world. It's been a weird January. So I'm probably going to start it in February. And we're going to help people build their best gardens ever from February through April, and plan to have your best garden ever in a permaculture design course. And there's going to be plenty of it going on here Tuesday nights live. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much I appreciate y'all. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the likes. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for watching. Thank you for checking out my books, my plants, all of that stuff. And consider that permaculture course coming up. I'll be talking to y'all later. Take it easy. Have a good night.